All right, hi, everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday edition, Bleav in Bills. Adam Benigni, WGRZ TV, and a well-traveled Sal Maiorana of the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. You work through all that jet lag, Sal?
I don't get jet lag because I stay on East Coast time. I try my hardest to go out there and I go to bed at 8 o'clock West Coast time. So it's 11 o'clock, my normal bedtime in Rochester. So, yeah, it doesn't affect me nearly as much as I think it affects a lot of people. So there you go. And I won't have to walk and talk at the same time today, Adam. I'm sitting down.
That was
very comfortable. Nobody be out of here, I don't think. So I think we're good to go.
That was epic by broadcast standards. In the 30 years that I've known you, and it's a shame we can't play it right now, but it was Sal, a guard in the press box asked him to move, and we were live, and he did, literally without missing a beat. To a different area of the press box. It was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. So kudos to you, my friend. And,
well, it wasn't quite as impressive as Josh Allen's performance in that game, but, I do what I got to do.
No, but I mean, you were in the situation, a little adversity, and you overcame it.
I didn't swear. That was the best part. I didn't swear online.
I know.
Because I wanted to.
And the guard was actually following you down as if like you had the audacity to keep talking.
Yeah.
I mean, the video's priceless. So if anyone can go back and watch on YouTube our post-game edition from LA Sunday night, it's worth it. I'm telling you. Okay. All right. So let's get into the news. Obviously, another big game this week against the 12-1 Detroit Lions on the road. Litmus test, all of those things. Let's get to news of the day first, as far as the team is concerned. I know Rasul Douglas with the knee and Taylor Rapp with a neck, shoulder, sat out this walkthrough today, but it appears good news on Kincaid and Coleman, right? Bring us up to date on what you know there.
Yeah, I mean, this is what McDermott said at noon when he spoke. Now, it's Wednesday, so a lot of things can change sometimes when Sean gives his reports from Wednesday to Friday, and today was a walkthrough, so there really wasn't anything that he was going to say too illuminating to begin with, because they weren't doing anything today. But, Rapp and Douglas both got hurt. They actually got hurt on that same play that cut the touchdown to Cooper Kupp. And then they both went back in the game. And then, unfortunately, Douglas got hurt again later. And this time it was the knee. So that's the injury that I think could be problematic this week. I don't know. I don't know what his status is going to be. It seems like Rapp will be on target to be able to play, but I think Douglas could be a real question mark that we're going to find out maybe on Friday, but it might be one of those game time, wait till the inactives are announced. And then everybody else seems to be trending in a good direction. I know Coleman just spoke to a few reporters just before we went on the air here, and I wasn't over there because I was talking to Ed Oliver, so I don't know exactly what he said, but I think we got the sense last week, Adam, that both he and Kincaid, they were probably pointing towards getting them back out there in this game. So, what are we, week 15? This is about as healthy as a team can be at the week 15 point.
It bears the question. I mean, fingers crossed on Taylor Rapp, right? But if Douglas can't go, that's a significant loss, especially in this game.
Yeah, I mean, they'd have to go with Kaiir Elam, who they clearly don't have any confidence in. He's been a healthy scratch the last 3 games. I mean, Jamarcus Ingram is playing above him. So I don't know what they would do, whether Ingram would actually be the starter, which would be stunning to me, because it feels like he's more of a, bring him in to play dime defense, that type. I think Elam would be the starter if Douglas can't play, but that bears watching, Adam, against a team like the Lions who can light up the scoreboard. And if Kaiir Elam or Jamarcus Ingram are on the field, you can bet that Ben Johnson, their coordinator, is going to be going after them, just like Sean McVay did last week. When Ingram came into the game, he was targeted, and they had success. Nakua got the key 4th down conversion against him and then scored the last touchdown against him. So that's a big thing to watch this week.
As you mentioned, today just a walkthrough, better indication on Thursday and certainly by Friday as to what might happen in the Buffalo secondary. All right, going to get into the matchup with the Detroit Lions. First, a quick word from the sponsor. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. Head to the website to get in on the action. Bet Online, the game starts here. All right, Bills-Lions at Ford Field, top 2 scoring offenses in the National Football League. Let's start there. And before we get to the specifics on that, I just listened to Josh Allen's press conference just prior to our recording here. They're still spending a little time talking about this sense of urgency thing or whatever. He didn't have much in the way of explanations for it, something he brought up after the game on Sunday, and something that Sean McDermott addressed earlier in the day with a pretty significant message from what I understand. I know you and I kind of downplayed that as kind of cliche after a loss type talk. Is there anything more to that? And do you feel like this is a team that's needing to address it heading into a game like this?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, Ed Oliver, a couple of us were talking to him just now, and he referenced the fact that they might have lacked some urgency. Now, I don't understand how that's a possibility, Adam. I don't care that they just won their division championship the week before in the snow against the 49ers. This team still has a lot to play for with that number 1 seed, which they now have hurt themselves greatly because the Chiefs lucked out again and won their game and the Bills lost. So they're 2 back with 4 to play. Yeah, they have the tiebreaker, but they'd have to win 3 of their last 4, and the Chiefs would have to lose 3 of their last 4, I believe is how it works out. And that's probably not going to happen. So they all, for all intents and purposes, pissed away any chance of the number 1 seed. Now they got to worry about the number 2 seed because they're tied with the Steelers. Now, Pittsburgh's schedule is way more difficult down the stretch than Buffalo's, so you would get the sense that the Bills will have the advantage there. But to not have urgency, if these guys are all saying that, to not have urgency in that situation is pretty disappointing to me. And we can make all the excuses, right? They went out to the West Coast coming off a division-clinching game. They played a desperate Rams team that had to win to stay alive in its own playoff chase. They came up against a quarterback and receiver who were at absolute elite levels in that game, and that's going to happen. Stafford's going to be a Hall of Famer. So I get all those things were melted into this, but this whole sense of urgency is kind of a disappointment. If that was truly the case, the Bills need to fix that in a hurry. Then they certainly can't afford to do that this week against the Lions.
No, they certainly can't. And it's something that, speaking to Sean McDermott's culture and all those things, they've done a very good job of that in terms of I know it's a cliche, but the game at a time and the focus and all those things, and it's translated to what's now a 10-3 record. It's why it kind of surprised me on Sunday, and then to hear it again today, that is bothersome if that's the case. Hopefully it's an outlier. Hopefully the defensive performance in that game fits that same description as some type of an aberration. Yes, they've been vulnerable against the run. Yes, the Bills defense is willing to give up yards on the ground, kind of a bend but don't break time approach. The aberration was in the secondary and the passing game and the effectiveness that McVay had in the motion of the Rams offense and all those things. Do you feel like that game against the Rams is going to be the exception, not the rule moving forward? How confident are you in this team's ability to make those corrections and execute? And I know, as we addressed, the Douglas injury potentially has a lot to do with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think my general sense is that it was an aberration. I mean, we just don't see Buffalo defenses get torched through the air like they were last week. Now, that being said, it might be an aberration again this week too, because this is the wrong team to be playing if you're suddenly having problems, covering people and rushing the passer the way they did against the Rams. This Lions team is, this is a better offensive team than they just saw. And it's going to be in their place again. The atmosphere is going to be electric. So this is a bad week for the Bills defense to be licking their wounds after what happened. So we'll see now moving forward as they get, through the rest of the regular season and then even into the playoffs. I think this Bills defense against the pass will probably return more to what we're used to seeing. But let's face it. I mean, they had some guys last week who just played so uncharacteristically bad. Taron Johnson, number 1. I mean, he has been so good all year. That might have been one of the worst games he's played as a Bill since coming here in 2018. He just couldn't cover anybody. Douglas, I thought, was having a terrible game until he got hurt. Nobody played well in the secondary. And it also goes back, Adam, to their pass rush. It was completely non-existent. And I don't care what kind of secondary you have. If you're not getting the pass rush which the Bills didn't at all last week, it's hard to cover NFL receivers, especially guys named Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. So that all melted together into what happened. And now this week, now they're going against the best offensive line in football. And as we just said, the number one scoring offense. So that is a bad mix of things that the Bills are going to have to deal with Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, the combination, a lot of people refer to Detroit as the best team in football. I mean, the numbers, you mentioned scoring. I mean, 32.1 points per game, number one offensively. Buffalo, number two at 30.5. And Detroit, the number two scoring defense. So you talk about complementary football. Bills, as we mentioned, have been vulnerable against the run. And that's something, I mean, Detroit will absolutely, the Allen against Goff and all those things, those comparisons, the MVP candidates, all of that is going to be a major storyline. But Detroit, so effective on the ground as well.
That's going to be the biggest worry because this team can hammer you with two running backs. It's really an impressive running game. And, that's what got the Rams off to their good start last week. They ran the ball. The final numbers show that they averaged 3.3 yards a carry. You have to remember that in the first half, they were gashing the Bills, and that allowed them to be two-dimensional throughout the rest of the game. Their running tapered off in the second half because, they were trying to kill some clock. Once they got up, they weren't quite as effective, and that brought the overall average down. Early in the game, they were getting the plays they needed, and it kept Stafford on schedule. They were in third and manageable almost every set of downs because the running game was so effective. The Lions are going to do this with their two guys. Those guys have a chance. Montgomery is like 220 yards away from 1,000. They might become the fifth. I think there's been 5 running back duos in the history of the NFL that have each rushed for 1,000 yards. These guys, Gibbs is already there, and Montgomery is getting close. So that's how good they are. And like I referenced, Adam, their offensive line, man, I mean, I think the Bills' offensive line is a good one. They've played well this year. They are not the same as this Detroit group. So it's going to be a humongous test, especially for the Bills' defensive line, which, quite frankly, has just not played well. I think they've been mediocre all season. And it's going to be a tremendous test for them to even keep that running game, let alone stop them, just to contain them so that the Lions just don't go off all day.
Yeah, it's been a storyline we've talked about all year. We talked about it before McCaffrey went out in the San Francisco game, how effective in the weather and what the Niners game plan was going to be. And what you just mentioned in the Rams game this past Sunday, they had, I think, 94 of their 137 yards rushing in the first half, which helped to set up as everything else they did through the passing game and in the air. That balance, that's something Buffalo, they're going to have their hands full trying to shut that down, obviously, given the shortcomings we have seen. A couple of players, Matt Milano, I think we're seeing the reality of transitioning back to game situational football after being out for as long as he was, recovering from both the leg and then the bicep injury. I mean, that, I suppose, to some degree, might be expected. You mentioned you spent some time talking to Ed Oliver, and before we move on, I want to go into that a little bit. I mean, here's a guy who they paid, who got his money, and talked about living up to that contract and really hasn't. What are your discussions like with him, and what's your take on where his game is at right now?
Yeah, I mean, I asked. He finished with, I think it was 9.5 sacks, which was a career high, and I think he had 14 tackles for loss. This year, he's got 1 sack and 2 tackles for loss. So that indicates to me that he is not winning up front. His game is supposed to be penetration. He's an undersized defensive tackle. That's always been a thing with him. You get a big 330-pound center or guard, and they can handle Ed Oliver. But his game has always been quickness, finding a gap, either blowing a play up in the run game, or at least not if he doesn't get if he doesn't back, he can get the pressure and force a guy for somebody else to get a sack. That's how he's been his whole career. That's not happening in 2024. He's getting swallowed up in the middle of that line. Daquan Jones hasn't been all that much better either. He's been a little bit better the last 2 weeks based on what I'm looking at with the grades from PFF, for instance. But altogether this season, their defensive tackle rotation has not been great. You throw in Dwayne Carter last week, he was terrible. I mean, he looked like a rookie who was getting manhandled. And Austin Johnson has been He's got the 2 fluky interceptions, but name one play other than those that he's made this season. They've got a problem in the middle of this line, and I think we're going to see that come to roost against Detroit because they're a mauling, manhandling offensive line, and Oliver's got to play better. I mean, he's sort of indicated that, he's not going to chase stats. He's going to continue to do what they ask him to do. But, while they're asking him to do his job, he needs to do his job better. That's just plain and simple. He's got to be better he's got 25 tackles all season. Like I said, only 2 for loss. And I Bleav those 2 came in one game, the home opener. I think those are the only 2 tackles for loss he's had all season. So he's got to be better.
Defense, obviously, the area where the Bills are going to be most vulnerable. They're going to score points. We mentioned that Detroit is the number 2 scoring defense in the NFL. That part of the matchup is going to be very interesting, as always. And the Lions dealing with some injuries on the defensive line. So it's worth pointing out that aspect of the matchup as we talk about Buffalo's defensive front. But it gets to the point. It certainly has dawned on me when you look at the list of names that Josh Allen statistically and otherwise is being compared to now in terms of the all-time greats, just what this guy has become as an NFL quarterback. I mean, that game, he becomes the first to pass for 3 touchdowns and rush for 3 in a single game in NFL history, not to mention joining, names like Steve Young, Drew Brees, Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, in terms of scoring marks that he either equaled or surpassed in that game on Sunday. I mean, it's amazing, and at the same time, we've known the reality of Josh Allen's talent. The fact he continues within the framework of this offense to continue reaching higher marks, I mean, just speaks volumes about what he's become as an NFL quarterback.
He's the MVP. I mean, I don't care. It was ridiculous today that the NFL puts out his their Player of the Week awards, and because Josh Allen's team didn't win, he doesn't get the award. Jamar Chase got it. Okay, he had a great game. I think he had 14 for 177, the game-winning touchdown. Come on. I mean, really? Was he really the best offensive player of the week compared to what Josh Allen did? Just because the Bills lost, he can't win the award. And I don't care about those awards at all, Adam. But it's just the point that he is the best offensive player in the NFL this year, as far as I'm concerned, and he should be a no doubt about it MVP. What's sad is that all that he did last week wasn't good enough because the defense had really a kind of a historically bad day. I mean, it's been so rare. I think that was the 3rd most points a McDermott team has ever given up. And the previous 2 highs were in 2017 before they were even a very good team. So it was just a shame that it all had to come down the way it did last week. But that being said, he's going to have to be almost as good this week, because they're going to have to outscore this team. This is not going to be a 20-13 slug it out game. They're going to score, and the Bills are going to have to score and then hopefully score more. And that's going to be on Josh Allen. We talked last week or maybe the week before about he hasn't had to put on the Superman cape nearly as much this year. Well, he did last week, and I hope he's got it dry cleaned and ready to go this week, because he's going to have to wear it again, I think, to win this one.
Yeah, I think that's the anticipation. And, as we've talked about, they traded for Amari Cooper after the departure of Stephon Diggs and moving on from him in the offseason. Traded for Cooper earlier this season to add some explosiveness that they lost back into the passing game. And I know that's something I did listen to Josh today, something he addressed. Cooper 6 for 95 against the Rams. Do you get the sense that that chemistry is forming and that Cooper, statistically at least, can be more effective moving forward here?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's overcome the injury now. He's back into practice full time. He's been here for a month and a half, I think. So I think they are starting to build that chemistry. And you saw that last week. There were a few very nice connections that the two of them made. He also drew the pass interference penalty in the end zone that got him down there for the last touchdown. So yeah, Cooper finally last week looked like he's got himself ingrained into the offense. He and Allen are starting to get on there. They're definitely on the same chapter and getting close to being on the same page, I think. And I think that was the expectation, right? I mean, they got him when they got him late, early November there. And I think the hope was that by the time the postseason push began, which it's in full swing right now, and then into the postseason, that they were going to be simpatico with each other. And I think we're starting to see it. And, if they can get Keon Coleman back this week and maybe Dalton Kincaid now for the first time, because when those guys were all healthy, Cooper had just gotten here and he was not really a part of this. Now you're finally going to see maybe the Bills' full arsenal on display if they can get those guys on the field. And again, what better week to have than a game where you're going to have to probably score 35 points to win the game.
All right, so we're going to get into the specifics of the matchup. I agree with you, Sal, 100%. With Glover Quinn, former safety for the Texans and the Lions. He will be our guest. He hosts Bleav in Lions for the Bleav Network. He's going to be on with us for the Friday edition, so we'll really be able to get into the X's and O's with someone who really knows that Detroit team and a former player as well. Before we wrap it up today, some significant news with regard to ownership. The Bills have added 10 limited partners. We've known this was in the works. They include former NBA stars Tracy McGrady, Vince Carter, Jozy Altidore, soccer star, and perhaps most significantly, the PE firm Arctos. As you know, that's a trend in the National Football League, with ownership now allowing private equity to enter the ownership mix. I Bleav it's up to 10%. This accomplishes a couple of things, right? And number one, it helps offset the stadium costs, which have now risen to $2.1 billion off the initial 1.4 and 1.54 billion projections for that stadium again. So Pegula has to make up those overruns. And it keeps a trend with the National Football League, and you've covered this league for so long, where the value of these franchises has escalated so high and so fast that in order for future ownership to keep that escalation going, they have to allow additional funding to enter the mix in some of these ownership groups. Both those factors very much at play in this development as far as the Bills are concerned.
Yeah, I mean, we knew this was coming. They had made the announcement, I think, back in April, I want to say, that they were investigating doing this. And you absolutely nailed it. The reason is the stadium. He is responsible. I mean, people have bitched and moaned about how much the county and the state are paying for that stadium, but they're capped at whatever that number is. I think it's $800 million was the cap for that. Everything else has to come out of Pegula's pocket. And I'm not crying any tears for the Pegula family, but it has gotten exorbitantly more expensive. And we're still a year and a half away from the place opening, almost 2 years away. And so, the costs are going to keep going up. He needed to generate some capital to cover that. We know these NFL networks pay a gazillion dollars to these teams. The revenue streams are incredible, but it's a lot of money we're talking about for this stadium. So I don't begrudge him for doing this. The family will still retain the majority stake. Nothing's going to change. Bills fans don't have to worry about the team moving or, whatever else they might worry about that they always do worry about. The Pegulas are still in charge. Nothing's going to change. It's just he's making some extra money. And these people, really, we're not even going to hear from these guys, Adam. We're not going to hear from Vince Carter and Tracy McGrady making decisions on who to draft, and that's not going to happen. This was just a money grab from Pegula, and I can't begrudge him for doing it. So good for the Bills. I think it firmly establishes the team staying in Buffalo, because now there's more stability in the ownership group with the guy who wants to keep it here still in charge.
And as we mentioned, it keeps a trend with what's going on around the National Football League and with what ownership has created pathways for from an investment perspective. And it just to wrap it up, because I think we can both offer a little bit of perspective on this. I mean, this is a long way from ownership what it was under Ralph Wilson, who would never have considered selling even a share of the team.
Yeah, and he would have gone broke in the process too, because Ralph wasn't rich enough to sustain today's NFL. I mean, if Ralph lived to be 120 years old or whatever he'd be right now, I wouldn't be that old, but he would be tough for him to sustain ownership of the team, especially with a new stadium being built. He just didn't have the same capital that the Pegulas do. So he would have had to do something, Adam, or the team would have moved.
Yeah, he didn't have the capital or the philosophy even, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, he wouldn't even sell naming rights, let alone a share of the team, because all those, I remember, and we were both a part of it, all those discussions kept coming up when it came to stadium renovations and all those things and the future in Buffalo and why not sell off a portion and keep it here and all. So in other words, it just illustrates in a lot of ways how far this franchise has come and perhaps more significantly how different it was. In fact, it illustrates what the NFL has become as much as anything, in my opinion.
This is a team, Adam, that you remember to generate capital. They had to go play games in Toronto, right? That was the ultimate cash grab, whatever that was, $70-some million they got to play whatever, how many games, 6, 7 games up there, one a year. I mean, rather than sell the, Ralph Wilson Stadium to New Era Field or whatever. That's how they did business back then. But this is a whole different world. And Pegula did what he had to do. And as I said, I'm going to point it out again. Bills fans shouldn't be worried about this. Nothing changes one iota. It just gives him the ability to pay off the stadium. And hey, now he's got more money to spend on the team. Look at it that way. He'll have more available cash to go get free agents and spend on the team.
That's what it is. I mean, today at the owners' meetings, he talked about, there's connections with Toronto, and we consider that our market and all those things. And it goes back to that Bills in Toronto series, which ultimately failed in kind of a miserable way. I mean, the Toronto fans, there was kind of a backlash protecting the CFL and all those things. And so now there's a marketing explanation for this. But this is a bottom line cash acquisition to help offset the stadium costs. And again, to keep the values of these franchises in general as part of an NFL trend escalating. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Bleav in Bills. We're going to be back again on Friday with our Bills-Lions preview. So we appreciate you being here, subscribing, following the show. For Sal Maiorana, Rochester Democrat and Chronicle, I'm Adam Benigni, WGRZ TV, and Sports Talk Live, Buffalo. We'll see you on Friday. Thanks for being with us here on Bleav in Bills.